My name is Axton Franzoy. I'm a fifth generation farmer here in southern New Mexico. My family helped build the dam, and we've been farming in the lower Rio Grande and other parts of New Mexico for about 100 years now. So we are constantly involved. My grandfather served on the Elephant Butte Irrigation District for a very long time, and my dad's on a few water boards, and we're constantly looking for ways to preserve and keep our groundwater taken care of, as well as our surface waters. So I'm actively a farmer too, so we've been changing a lot of infrastructure over the years. It's amazing to see how much irrigation infrastructure has changed just in my lifetime. And if you guys have any questions about that and where we're looking at moving forward on the agricultural standpoint, at least for vegetables and pecan trees, feel free to ask me anytime. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Magnuson. I'm the Director of Water and Natural Resources for Madera County. We are in the California Central Valley, in the heart of California, and I serve as the Groundwater Sustainability Agency Manager for about 220,000 acres. I also serve as the Flood Control Manager because we're the county and we all have multiple jobs.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Tanya and the organizers for inviting me to present to you today. My name is Mike Hammond. I retired as the New Mexico State Engineer in July, but kind of completing a 40-year career of great variability, I guess, in terms of who I've worked for and served with. In Tanya's remarks, she mentioned the stringent water conservation efforts that were implemented in Santa Fe. I was on the front line of that back in the late 90s. And believe me, the community was not interested in a lot of conservation initiatives at that point, but we were in a drought, and it took a lot of community engagement and some angry discussions with business owners and car wash people, laundromats, all the people that were directly impacted by water conservation initiatives that the city council was proposing based on the urgency of the matter, right? So human nature is urgency, threats of litigation, fear of loss of something can drive to collaboration, but initially folks want to fight. Right? So I've gone through that throughout my career. In fact, I even served as the executive director of the Trinity River Restoration Program up in Northern California, where fight and litigation was fundamental in that aspect from an endangered species perspective and basic tribal interests and a number of things. And we have a lot of that in New Mexico. I actually worked for a tribal nation right after they settled their water rights negotiations with the state of New Mexico and the federal government to help them implement their water administration processes, and that's the Hickory Apache Nation up in the San Juan Basin, that is also a key member of the 10 Tribes organization in the Colorado River Basin that are trying to hold some place at the table for their, quote, senior undeveloped water rights. And so we have that going on in New Mexico, and I played a role in both the Navajo Nation's water settlement process when I was with Hickory, and also later in my role as state engineer and other aspects. I've also worked as the executive director of the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District right here in the Middle Rio Grande Valley that manages water for essentially 60,000 acres. That includes the 6 Middle Rio Grande pueblos. They're members of that entity from a water delivery perspective, but they're certainly independent sovereign nations holding their own value system and their need to quote settle their water rights. We have 23 tribal nations in New Mexico. We've only settled essentially about 8 of them. There's 5 or 6 more that are pending in Congress, and I hope even in this new world order that they may go through. But you can see we're basically only halfway over the finish line on that aspect. And it's critically important that everybody's water rights are well understood so that you can engage in collaborative efforts at the community level. And that's the only hope that we have. And I'll tie that into groundwater. 95% of our communities rely on groundwater. And Tanya mentioned some of them are doing a conjunctive strategy at huge investments to have both surface water treatment and groundwater conjunctive strategies within their portfolio so that we can prolong these tougher decisions that have to be made. And many people have made huge investments in that, and that's also part of the Eastern New Mexico pipeline issue. They're waiting for surface water over there. So anyways, that's kind of the spectrum of things that I've been involved in my career, and have been very, very blessed and pleased to play a role and work closely with my former colleagues who stole a lot of my thunder probably this morning with their excellent presentations and discussions. But I think New Mexico has been a leader in managing groundwater and also determining how to make better investments in the conjunctive use strategy going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Ronald Rayner. I'm a farmer in central Arizona. We farm both inside the Phoenix Active Management Area and in other groundwater basins a little further away. We also farm in the Central Valley of California. Our acreage has been reduced quite a lot because we've been selling land for fear of the consequences of the Groundwater Management Act in California. But we have properties that's in the East Cahuilla segment, and where the remaining land that we have does have surface water rights, so at least we have a chance to survive. Because if you know how the system works, if you don't have surface water and you're only relegated to what's allowed under the groundwater pumping, there are not many crops you can grow, and the result we've already seen in a report from the Rural Appraisers Association out of Central California that they've seen a reduction in land values of 25 to 50% just in the last 6 months. People are finally starting to realize how the system is destined to work. And now there are big grants being offered in California, I understand, for figuring out how to repurpose agricultural lands. And that's a real thing, isn't it? Just to give you a little other background, I did serve about 10 years on the Groundwater Advisory Council for the Phoenix Active Management Area. There was a 5-member board that was kind of responsible for overseeing the activities of the Groundwater Management Act. You know, you'll have to pardon me. I have my phone turned off, but I do have my hearing aids in, and it plays by Bluetooth, so I couldn't turn my phone clear off.
I have the same problem.
Yeah. I really didn't anticipate that. Another area that I did had the good pleasure of serving on was the Arizona Water Commission, and this was in the period of time before Arizona had a Department of Water Resources. And I was kind of in the next room over when Bruce Babbitt was involved in producing the Groundwater Management Act in 1980. And so it was quite a project, you know, the people, all of the players in the room were I've seen a lot of things, and I've done a lot of work on surface water issues as well, but groundwater, I just tell people there's nothing more site-specific than groundwater. And that's one of the driving things that has led me to oppose any type of federal involvement in groundwater management. It was left to the states long ago, and I really believe it's a state's activity. And more than that, I've served on a couple of committees in this past couple of years. There's a lot of work going on in politically in dealing with groundwater in the state, trying to organize additional management areas for some of the outlying rural areas. And the governor has her ideas about one direction. Maybe we view it as top down, and the stakeholders have produced a very good proposal, we think, that is like bottom up, so that you organize the people at the local level, let them figure out how they're going to manage that groundwater to be sustainable.
Thank you all very much. As you can see, we have a great panel of experts and a variety of perspectives. So we're going to tease out a few more details from them. And I'm going to start with a question for Stephanie. And so, Stephanie, the California legislature adopted the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in 2014. We could probably have an entire session just on how that's going and the pros and cons of things in different areas, but I'd be interested in your perspective on that. And then I did want to come back to, because this is an agricultural focused discussion, the concept of the multi-benefit agricultural land repurposing program. And then just to make it super, super interesting and complicated, I understand you also have to deal with flood control and flood management issues. So hats off to you for having an easy job there.
Thank you. So briefly, I think everybody gets the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA. And we also jokingly refer to it as the fraternity no one wants to join. People often spell SGMA wrong, so just SGNA. So basically, if you are critically overdrafted, you need to form an agency and then get a plan and turn it in by January of 2020. And your plan needs to show how you become sustainable over 20 years. So that's kind of the big picture with SGMA. Lots of nuance though, and some of the nuance I think gets at what you're asking about, what's working or not. One thing that's really interesting in SGMA is there's no limit to how many agencies you can form within a basin or a sub-basin. So Madera County, for example, has a little piece of land that's in what's called the Delta Mendota sub-basin, which has 23 different groundwater sustainability agencies. They then produced 6 different groundwater sustainability plans, which had to sort of talk to each other and appear coordinated. They were not, and they were rejected by the state. And so that's one area where the state board may actually intervene. So the law itself seems to work fairly well, but there's some nuance in terms of the number of agencies and the number of plans, because I think those of us who are water resource planners would probably agree, when you have everybody at the table and you're in one agency, you can have those hard conversations. When everybody forms their own agency, you're sort of balkanizing and not getting those conversations to happen. Same thing with plans. If you're in a basin, you should have one plan, not different geographic plans, because you're all sharing the same groundwater. So then, as Ron alluded to, we do a fair amount of land repurposing. We've had a couple of different grants. Basically, land repurposing in California is kind of following plus something else. And the plus is where the kind of interesting nuance is. One grant that we've had from the state called LandFlex is following, plus you have to do cover crops on what remains, and you get paid. You've essentially sold your allocation to the state, and the water is staying in the ground. The multi-benefit land repurposing, you need to propose something, and then projects are ranked and funded. There is a really high demand for this in the Sigma landscape. For example, we thought we have enough money for 5 to 10 projects, and we had 70 different projects proposed. So very, very underfunded. Farmers are looking at alternatives and ways of surviving and keeping farming, but they do need some financial help and incentives. And then lastly, in terms of flood control, we have been able to work with some help from the state and get some excess flood flows in the ground. Our governor issued an executive order in 2023 that basically said, hey, if you're at risk of flooding, we are going to suspend our discussions on water rights and just take the water to help with flood risk and get it in the ground. 2023 was great. We got 50 to 100,000 acre feet of water in the ground, depending on how it was reported and how you count. So very successful. Unfortunately, then that was memorialized in a law, and as we all know, as laws are made, then people start sticking certain things in them, and the law basically has conditions in it that make it impossible for us to use it and do that sort of recharge.
Thank you. Well, that's interesting. And as I commented earlier, I know just dealing with stormwater management, dealing with recharge is an issue that is really evolving here in New Mexico, and so we are looking for those kind of examples. And I meant to say this earlier, but I'm really inspired by the next generation coming up and Ryan being there on the ground and working through some of these programs. So Axton, I'm gonna call on you next, and from a perspective as a farmer in this lower Rio Grande region, what are some of the ways that you and your family or your neighbors have been able to help the community and work on taking responsibility for the issues of groundwater management in your areas? And again, pros and cons, pluses, minuses, whatever you want to talk about.
Okay, so one of the things that we implemented is in our farm in the lower Rio Grande, where we don't have a permanent crop like pecans, we entered into the rotational fallow program, where us as a farmer paid an amount of money to not plant anything, like she was saying earlier. We're still able to use our surface water, which we didn't. We ended up selling ours to a pecan farmer that is a little short on water, but we essentially fallowed about 450 acres that we haven't farmed in 18 months. Now, one of the pros for that is being in the lower Rio Grande Valley, is a lot of our water is has the high saline and brackish, and as this drought persists, it's getting worse. So not having enough surface water allotment, we're not able to what we call flush those excess salts. However, if we're not pumping water on there over 18 months, and hopefully we get a few inches of rain, hasn't really happened, but hopefully we will, we can essentially start, flushing some unwanted salts down into the ground. And so there is some benefits there. Also, fallowing crops, you don't want to, you need to stick to a crop rotation. So for example, everybody knows hatch green chili, and it's all grown in that area, but it has been grown in that area for 60 to 80 years, where we're getting a lot of disease pressure that's also being affected. So being able to rest your ground and kind of take it out of rotation is also a benefit, and we're able to not pump as much water there. When I was a kid, we were primarily flood irrigated. Now we are 100% drip irrigated. There are pros and cons to that. You're a lot more efficient with your water. However, just because you have cotton or onions and you have that way to irrigate, it's not necessarily, it requires a certain amount of water to hit your max yield. You're not really saving water, you're just being more efficient with it, and doing that is saving water. However, if you want to talk to Dr. King, we have some theories and stuff. Is it hurting you because you're not recharging, by flooding versus drip, and that's something we're still kind of learning and moving forward to. But however, as far as from a farming perspective, our yields have gone up with, using primarily drip irrigation, and we've had, really good success on the vegetable end. We do have some trees on drip irrigation too. We have some sprinklers, and just kind of seeing how we can be more efficient as the caretakers of the water and the land. We're always open to suggestions and, data. We're always looking it's nice for people to try to keep the farmers informed, because we're always looking for different ways to be more effective too. You know, we all understand that this water is dropping, you know, us probably more than most, because, you know, we're seeing it with our well production, and we're having to deepen wells, and it comes at a very high cost for us too. And whatever we need to do in order to protect those, you know, our groundwater and surface water, you know, we're gonna be on board to do that. One of my concerns is there's a lot of water rights out there that are not in good standing, they're not being used, you know, and to be honest, there's a few of those water rights that I'm interested in kind of getting into production. However, we're at this critical state to where we're already kind of over allocated, so where does it come into fruition, what's gonna happen with those water rights? You know, there's a lot of what we call Mendenhall rights too, that have never been put into use, but they're very old water rights, and we just, us as farmers, just don't know what's gonna happen with a lot of those water rights that aren't in good standing, and I think it's something that needs to kind of be talked about. There's a lot of other water rights out there that aren't in good standing that at any time can be put into use, and I think that's one of the things that, you know, needs to be talked about. Is that gonna be allowed to happen? You know, the state engineer does a good job saying in certain areas you can and can't, but there's a lot of water rights out there in areas where you can pump, but however, if you start pumping, you're gonna start depleting that groundwater. That's one of my concerns, so.
Thank you, Axon. I think that's a great segue. I'm jumping around for our panel just so you guys keep you on your toes, right? But to hear from our former state engineer on that interconnection between, you know, the data and the local practices and the state regulatory system, you know, how do you go about working together to try to address the reality of that situation? And Mike, I did want to have you comment in particular on what's happening over in the Ogallala, in addition to the Rio Grande examples too, please.
Sure. Mentioned earlier, you know, the litigation in and of itself is difficult and challenging, and nobody wants it, but it does drive folks to the table for alternative resolution processes, and to a certain extent that's happened in many of our basins because of either endangered species issues, or as I mentioned earlier, settlement of tribal water rights, and Lower Rio Grande, obviously the Supreme Court case is really galvanized efforts at the state and regional and local levels to come to the table and start to, you know, wrestle with hydrologic realities that we face. You know, the carrot or the stick, right? I mean, that's kind of that balance that the regulator has. You know, the state engineer is the regulator, is the administrative head for water resource allocation in the state. And then we have our complementary agency of the Interstate Stream Commission that Ryan works for, that is the water planning agency, and also the agency that's responsible for compact management, water deliveries under all of the 11 compacts that the state is engaged in. We're kind of a headwater state in some areas, and then we're recipients of flows coming in from other headwater states, like the Rio Grande. A lot of our water from the snowpack runoff in particular comes from Colorado. So, you know, achieving that balance of regulatory nature with the water users does require a lot of engagement at the individual permit holder level, as well as in a collective community associated with a municipal water right, which is quite different than an individual surface or groundwater permit holder. Municipalities have kind of a 40-year planning horizon. They're allowed to acquire water rights, in some cases required to acquire water rights ahead of the demand that comes into play. So there's a lot of different pieces from a regulatory perspective that the state engineer engages in But really, that challenge when you're in litigation and it has compact implications requires kind of a holistic, engagement where it's absolutely critical that you engage with the water users to fully describe what will happen or may have to happen from a strict regulatory perspective if we cannot achieve an agreeable outcome. And so that I think we've made a lot of progress, and I won't speak to the Lower Rio Grande because my former colleagues did a great job in the earlier panel to really drill into that. But on the Ogallala side, New Mexico is in the thinnest lens of the Ogallala. We're kind of on that far western edge of it, and the drawdown situation is at critical levels. There's two major cities over there. One is Clovis, the other is major in New Mexico's context, Portales. Clovis was very proactive in trying to be a leader in the region, not only to take a big role in moving forward with a major federally supported surface water supply project that would bring a major pipeline down from the Canadian River from a reservoir that's owned by the Interstate Stream Commission for their future, but also in a groundwater management context. Portales, on the other hand, for a variety of reasons, kind of just was in a wait and see. We can survive this mode. The surface water is going to, project will be done in time for us to survive. And so they weren't as proactive, and they're paying the price right now because they're really struggling at a granular level of meeting their day-to-day demands. In some cases, they didn't even have adequate fire protection because they were so busy meeting just normal daily demand. And so my point here is that there was a proactive level, and it involved the agricultural community that essentially was pumping much more water on a per capita basis, if you will, for development of wheat and corn and other forage crops out on the eastern plains. And there's several dairies and whatnot out there. And they, this Ogallala Land and Water Conservation Group was formed under the leadership of Clovis and other entities. They went forward and they actually partnered with the Cannon Air Force Base, and they took advantage of a regional grant program that the Department of Defense had initiated in other base contexts that provides money to develop kind of in the case of the Ogallala area, a permanent landscape of the old plains of what they used to be, to kind of start to restore the plains environment by convincing farmers in a grant program that the state contributed to just essentially stop pumping and get a permanent payment over a period of years, perhaps decades, to actually completely stop pumping for agricultural purposes and become dryland farmers and grazers on native vegetation like it once was, before groundwater pumping became a primary source of water in that region. So, kind of post Dust Bowl days, right? That whole area suffered from the Dust Bowl situation. So that's a success story in and of itself. They were able to get 18 major pumpers off the system. The groundwater tables recovered pretty quickly in a key area of concern. And putting PFAS contamination aside, That whole area is in is a major groundwater basin recovery program, hopefully in such a fashion that will allow enough time for the surface water project to be completed and bring surface water in as their kind of conjunctive use strategy going forward.
And take the pressure off of the groundwater supplies
Exactly.
and the farmers who are relying on that groundwater. So the synchronistic relationship is at play there as we speak. Ron, thank you, Mike. Ron, in Arizona, we already heard in your opening, a comment about not wanting a top-down approach from the governor's office or the management agencies there. Are there examples in Arizona of what's working from the ground up, and where do you see the future with respect to those issues?
First of all, maybe I can compare a little bit the difference in operating under management acts both in Arizona and California. In Arizona, when the 1980 groundwater law was passed, if you had land that had not been irrigated prior to 1979, it could never be. So it slammed the door on any new irrigated acres, and what you got from the act was actually an irrigation grandfathered right, and it was only for the net inside the fence acres that were cultivated and irrigated. So you had that irrigation grandfather right, and then what you had to do is you had to go back and gather up 5 years worth of records to show what crops were produced on the acres that you were claiming the grandfather right for. And then based on those crop acres, then you were assigned a water duty, and that water duty was based upon the history, and I guess Dr. Leonard Erie did a lot of the old work on determining what the consumptive use of all these crops were, and that was in the 40s, late 40s. But those were the numbers they used, and they made an assumed 65% application efficiency based on those consumptive uses. And anyway, that was the water duty you were assigned. In California, and then we have to report each year how much water we pumped, what we pumped, not necessarily what we applied, but what we pumped. And we have to pay a water withdrawal fee, so I write a check for $10,000 to $20,000 every year for the pump tax for the water withdrawn. Well, it's set every year with different numbers by the department. But in California, actually, I don't have to meter my pumps. I do, just so that I know what's going on. But the satellite measures my fields every day, and they tell me how much water I use, how much I consumptively use. So it's only measuring the consumption. So actually, in California, my irrigation efficiency doesn't make any difference. And I'm not so sure that that's probably correct, because the water's not wasted, it's not lost to the basin. If I put on too much water, where's it going to go? In California, they don't even have any provision in my area for wastewater. There's no runoff, there's no drains, there's nothing anywhere. You put water on through your drip system and it goes on your field. We did a little recharge even with that. We didn't have the ability to capture any of the flood water that was mentioned, but we had 100% in uncontrolled flow. So starting in January of 22, we turned on our drip systems and just ran them full bore, and our neighbors thought we were crazy. They couldn't understand why you'd be irrigating when we had 12 to 15 inches of rain. I said, this is for the year it doesn't happen, because under the Sigma rules, you can carry surface water credits forward indefinitely. So we didn't have a way to put flood water on the field except through our drip system, and boy, that's what we did. We just kept cranking it and putting it on there. But that's, just the difference between the two systems is really you know, interesting for me, and of course I'm glad I have my 30-something-year-old son who can manage our water dashboard in the Sigma. So I get this thing that's got all the numbers on it all the time. Actually, what I have to do inside the Sigma is I have to prove where the water came from that they charge me for. They charge me for the ET, then I have to show if I didn't get it from a surface water source, I'm assumed to have pumped it. And the only thing that's super concerning is I read the minutes all the time from the local Sigma entity, and one of their biggest concerns is how they're going to collect the money for all the penalties that they're applying to all these people. And they're afraid now that the land values are lower than what the penalties are that they're applying. That's
depressing too. And I don't mean to joke about it, but I think it really exemplifies how complicated our regulatory system is and the practical realities that farmers have to deal with. So we have time for a lightning round now of final questions, so maybe 2 or 3 minutes each. And I'm just gonna throw an easy but still complicated question out there of, what are some of the things that keep you up at night? What gives you hope for the future? So a contrast for something you worry about and something you are excited about and positive about. And Axon, you want to start off, and then we'll go down the road. Thank you.
So some of the things that keep me up at night is from an agricultural perspective, we're not just fighting few things. We kind of have a lot of different things. Our labor's going up, our fuel's going up, our fertilizer's going up, we're running out of water. There's a lot of changes coming with the EPA on what we're going to be able to spray on our crops. Our chemicals are kind of, I wouldn't say getting attacked, but they're going to be regulated a little bit differently, and it's just really concerning for me that there's just a lot of things going on in the agricultural sector right now, and there's not a lot of guarantees. However, farmers have always persisted, and they're intelligent. I'm not bragging, but we always find a way to do it, and we are compliant people. Most farmers are, and we want to do whatever is best and move in a forward direction, and I believe that we, as always, will do that. I'm excited for that.
So in terms of keeping me up, I worry about things like food security, clearly. I worry about not having the right governance structure to do the work that we're doing. Counties took all the land that no one else wanted, which that's terrible, right? And then I do worry, and maybe this is a call to action, we don't get a lot of people who are sane and happy and want to give a compliment attending public meetings. But that just doesn't happen. If you have a gripe, if you have issues, you're gonna share that with our board. But it would be useful, I think, in the public process if more reasonable people, if that was like your goal for the year, you're gonna go to one public meeting and say something. Even if your comment is, that is not a bad idea, I like that. Like, that's okay to be positive about something. So I'll just put that out there in case anyone decides to make that a resolution. Thank you.
I like it.
What keeps me awake at night is the dry January that we have right now, and the trend of concern. We have a 20th century infrastructure system based on the great cycle of normal oscillations of water supplies in the Southwest, but we're not in normal anymore, and we really gotta figure out the next path forward with addressing the data needs, dealing with the water supplies that we are going to continue to see with the maybe more dramatic monsoon events that can create its own degree of chaos and hazards with flooding events, but really start to think about transitioning into that arena. And I'm very pleased that it's being looked at as a major component of the settlement in the lower Rio Grande basin, but it has to be looked at throughout the entire state, particularly along the Pecos areas and along the Rio Grande in particular for our region. On a personal level, I'm also a farmer. I think our regulatory system is not agile enough to really quickly enough to adapt to what I see as a really solid conjunctive use strategy, that if we do have great data, the real-time operations that they're moving towards in the lower Rio Grande, I think we can optimize things a lot more than we're doing right now. And the regulatory handcuffs can stifle that. And I'm hopeful that my successors at the agency find a way to explore those opportunities. And I'll continue to agitate from the side now that I'm a private member of the public to help assist in that process through regional water planning and various aspects that I hold out a lot of hope for. Thank you.
Probably the thing that keeps me up at night is wondering where we're gonna farm next. That's a different problem. It's the urbanization that's occurring around our place. I mean, it's just the land that we have been farming in the last 4 years. I counted that we've had 2,500 acres go into buildings. And, you know, that's one of the things I kind of fault our Department of Water Resources for. They don't have a good way to track actually the conversion. Because I'm still getting requests for reports from piece that went out of production 2 or 3 years ago, and still I'm being done for the reports on that.